Hey guys, good evening. I believe this is towards the end of the day. This is probably the last session from what we heard. My name is Sabine Nair. I'm a program manager on the data integration team. We own a few services amongst us, but along with me.
Hi everyone, my name is Mudit Mittal. I'm engineering manager, for the data integration area.
So export to data lake, that's the new service we launched last week. How many people here have heard about it? I see some hands. I can't say everybody. OK. So we had a blog published last week. We got quite a few likes. That was pretty encouraging. So that's the topic we're going to talk about here. It's about primarily taking data from CDS and pushing it to the lake. Now, of course, the question is why, and we'll talk about some of that today. So the objectives here is to explain, of course, the why, what is the service all about. You should, after this, be able to enable this in your environment because we are in public preview. There is no any special thing required. If you have serial and a true incremental and a true incremental and a true incremental write or sync looks like. And the most important part is how do you consume this on the data lake side. How many people here use the CDS, Common Data Service? OK, that's a good sign. OK, thank you. So the why. If you have data in CDS, well, the challenge that was posed to us a year back was, or actually 8-9 months back, was how do I enable insights on the data that I have in Common Data Service? Like, would you want to run reporting directly on a transactional database? That's how CDS started to be. This is a system of records. Would you want to run any heavy machine learning directly on CDS? We typically don't do that on a transaction system. So the obvious thing is we got to take the data out. The other big thing is like the scalability factor. That's another reason to take the data out. So taking the data out was important so that we could run all these reporting, we could run the machine learning, we could do some data warehousing. If you are a large customer, medium customer, you're like, hey, it's my data. Let me do whatever I want to do with my data. So I want to take it out and like democratize my data. So we'll get to that. So that's some of the reasons why this service was built. There are more, and I'll explain that towards the end of the deck, so you have a better idea of how this is being used by other services as well. So the stuff that I just covered was, if you are a typical medium to large customer, could be smaller, it doesn't matter. You want to take the data out, you want to democratize the data so that you could run some of these machine learning or some of the reporting as we have heard. Anybody know another service which lets you do that? It's not like, hey, we are the only service. Yeah, go ahead.
Data export service?
That's great. The data export service is another service which was built a few years back, which is primarily to take the data out from CRM. Not necessarily CDS, one of the same, but CRM to Azure SQL. We know it very well because we own that service as well. So this is primarily meant for pushing it to data lake because if you think about the data lake, and that will be my next slide, it is built for analytics, super duper scalable, built for enterprises. I must say it's very cost effective. I don't know exact prices and all, but I've read up a bit about it. Very, very cost effective. So all these attributes make the data lake meant for this purpose. So again, the service is primarily about taking data from CDS, so think entities, and pushing it to the lake, and then you can do whatever you want in the lake with your own data. That's what it is about. This is another way to visualize. As I said, this is Power BI, Azure ML, Azure Databricks, I keep forgetting that, Data Factories, SQL Data Warehouse, all these consumers on the data lake know how to consume the data because the data that we put in the lake is in the CDM, or Common Data Model format. How many of you here have heard of CDM? Excellent. Now, everybody should take this and maybe follow up as a key learning for you. Make sure you attend these sessions here or look past recordings. If you're working with data, you definitely want to learn the CDM format or the Common Data format. The whole purpose of it is like if we can all agree to store data in one single format, then it's easier to consume. So that's what Azure is actually hooking up to be. All the services across Microsoft is more and more know that if I see CDM data, I know how to consume it. That's where it's coming down to be. So you want to definitely, and we'll show you that in some of the demos today. And to that point, we're already at a demo, so I'll quickly show you what this looks like. There's a little dance here. Okay, so once you go to the Power Apps or the Maker portal, actually, you would see a tab on the left-hand side which says Export to Data Lake. And as I said, this is public preview. You don't need any special permissions. You can do it today. So we went into preview last week. So you click on this Export to Data Lake, and before you can export your entity data into the lake, you have to think of a pipe from CDS to your data lake storage in your Azure subscription. So you're basically creating a pipeline between the two. So you start with the new link to data lake wizard. Go next. It automatically picks your subscription, resource group, and storage account. In this case, it was automatic, I should mention, because we just have one. So it was super automatic that way. Or you can actually very well go in there and try typing or search for it, and it should show it for you. Like in this case, I have multiple storage account, I believe. Yeah. So you pick the subscription or storage account, hit next, and that's it. This is the second step of the wizard, and that's the end of the wizard as well. You have to pick the entities that you want to push. In this case, I'll just choose lead, hit save. So if you look, it's trying to map to the lake. It's trying to set permissions on the folder. It's trying to create a file system behind the scenes, which is in the data lake. That's the destination. So once this saves, you create effectively a linked data lake, in this case with the name of my data lake. And inside this, you would see the lead entity that I pushed, which is in progress. I hit a little refresh. Don't mean to brag about it, there's just 51 records. It had to be fast. So I'll show you some more as we do multiple demos today, wherein even the larger entities, it can do it pretty significantly well. So this shows that lead was just pushed to the lake, okay? So now let's go to the lake. This is if you go to portal.azure.com, you choose your storage account, and under that, you would see a file system. I have to refresh this, actually. Okay, if I expand this, it creates a new container there. And you would see this is what you're getting to the CDM format here. A CDM format, when I say that, you typically see a model.json file, which is this, and it's about to be populated. And then you have the entity folders. So I chose lead, so it's showing the lead entity folder. Inside the lead entity folder, you have CSV files. The files are partitioned. We'll talk more about that later today, okay? So these files are partitioned, so now you know the data is being pushed. Give it a few minutes, and it should start showing up on the other side as well. So let me give you a quick example of what the data looks like. So if I go to lead on the entities, yeah. Here, basically, I even have a dashboard that is being put together, and the dashboard actually should fill up once I push the data into the lake. So here I've kind of mimicked that it's an athletics goods company which has all these celebrities, athletic stars as leads for that company with bazillion dollars. So you have Carmelo Anthony, I don't know who Don McLeod is, Donovan McNabb, he's from my school. So you have all these guys who are my prospective leads that I'm actually tracking, and I'll soon show the dashboard. Now, if I go back to the partition file in the data lake, let's double click on it. What we expect to see is some of the same names shown up in the data lake, right? Okay. Oops, what did I just do? So let's say Carmelo. There you go. So you know the data has already reached the destination from the source. So that's just an example of showing it. Now I'll just show you one more thing, which is one of the critical pieces. And we'll revisit this multiple times so that you get an idea of what this model.json is. As I explained, the model.json describes the metadata in the whole CDM folder. It shows you the attributes. It has a bunch of other pieces, and it's one of the most important files, arguably, that you want to read there. So if I just open this, and I've learned this is, it's not much fun to read, but I have an extension here. And apparently, I have to trick it a little bit. Okay, and if I just refresh it, there you go. It's much, much readable. I hope you guys can see the screen, right? So I won't go into too many details, but you can see it will show you all the attributes for lead that it actually is being pushed to the lake. Okay. Now on the dashboard side, I'll just give it a quick refresh. We expect for this to just fill up. This is typically how your reporting would look like. And this is just to show how the data moved from CDS all the way to the lake, and we just verified it in the Azure Data Lake as well. There you go. So this is what net we are building. It is not just for Power BI, as I said. That is one of the use cases. A common use case, I would say. A lot of companies want to do this. But anything like that's supported on the data lake in terms of ML, Azure data warehousing comes up a lot. You want to do some kind of machine learning. You want to run some algorithms. All those pieces is by pushing the data. So this is what net we have built. And there is a lot more we'll explain. We'll revisit some of these as we go along. Okay, so going back to the deck. You want to go through the requirements?
Sure. Thanks, Sabine, for the cool demo. Now we're going to talk about some more internal details of how the service works, what are the requirements, and the advanced features around it. So first, obviously you need like a common data service, and since this is enabled at a system level, and it is a continuous integration, data is going to flow irrespective of who is entering the data into the system. So we really need like an administrator to enable it. And this is the administrator, which you define in the common data service. This is not the Azure administrator. This is the administrator in the common data service. And any entity which we move to data lake, we incrementally move. We're going to go into the details of that. But for us to incrementally move the data, we need the entities to be change tracking enabled, and also they should have created date time. Now, most of the entities out of the box or custom which you create, they get these properties by default. Okay. Now, this was a source piece. Now coming to the target data lake Gen 2 storage. So how many folks know about data lake Gen 2? Okay. So quick thing, like the basic difference between data lake Gen 2 and Azure Blob is the hierarchical namespace. Okay. So the reason I'm kind of like talking about is this is often confused between Gen 1 and Blob. So Microsoft has kind of invested a lot on Gen 2, and the vision is to combine Gen 2 and Blob together. Okay. So if you go create like an Azure storage account, there is one property which you need to change on the Blob to make it Gen 2, and that property is basically hierarchical namespace. Okay. I mean, that property has a lot of other features, but that is high-level difference between an old Blob and a Gen 2 account. Okay. And obviously, if you're pushing data to data lake, when you kind of link it with your CDS environment, you need to have owner access to that data lake. Okay. And what we do, kind of magically is once you link CDS to data lake, we are basically providing permission to our service to write to the data lake. Okay. So people who come from like data export service usage, if you remember, like for SQL Azure, we used to ask for key vault, username, password kind of stuff. So this is way better than that. In this case, it's actually we are granting our service access to that. So it's service principal based. There is no kind of secret involved. There's no username, password involved, and there's no key vault required. Okay. So that's pretty much from the requirements. Now, talking about the features. So obviously, it's kind of like pretty simple UI, intuitive UI, few clicks. Sabine did like 2 or 3 clicks to enable it end to end. The UI is inside Common Data Service. You can operationalize the entities for analytics. We can do initial as well as incremental, and we'll talk about the differences as well as the internals related to it. There's no difference between standard and custom entities. So if you have custom entities and change stacking is enabled, you can enable it for push to data lake through the same UI. Like there's no kind of like difference there. We support create, update as well as delete. Okay. In this release, we are supporting hard deletes. In future, we're going to add support for soft delete as well. Okay. There is concept of continuous snapshots, which we have added for large analytical scenarios. Again, part of the demo, we're going to kind of go deep into it, and we will also explain how we do snapshots. But high level, what we want to do is when we are updating data, as in the data changes in the source, we are writing the data to data lake. At the same time, the consumers like Power BI and other downstream processes may be reading the same data. Okay? We want some isolation. We don't want data to change on user every second, right? Okay? So there is that isolation is built up using the concept of snapshots. Okay? Now, one interesting thing which we want to talk about in the architecture as well, this is push-based instead of pull. So what does that mean? There is no recurring process which is running and pulling data from CDS. As and when the data changes in CDS, the changes are pushed into an event hub and a service bus. From there, the data is kind of pushed into data lake. So it's very less kind of overhead on the actual app. Okay. And another interesting thing which we'll talk about is the data partitioning. Now, imagine you have millions of records which are accumulated over years, months, days. Now, if we give you one file, it is hard to consume. Okay? And as and when data is getting updated, you don't want to keep on loading that same big file. Okay? So what we did, we started partitioning the data. So part of this release, the data is partitioned based on created date when the records were created. This is why when Sabine was demoing, if you notice, there were 2 files. 2017.csv and 2019.csv. That's basically because the records which were created in 2017, they are part of that first file, and the records which were created in 2019 are part of the second file. Now, this is very specific to how entity is and how the customer is having number of records in that entity. Based on business requirements, a particular entity may even have 1 million records in a day versus like an year. So that partitioning cannot be just fixed to year. So behind the scenes, we support partitioning at month level as well as day level. Okay? For this release, again, like we're starting with year. Part of the new features when Sabine is going to talk about, he's going to talk about smart partitioning as well, where we would automatically detect it. Okay? Now let's move on to the architecture. So key things to highlight, we have Common Data Service on the left, and then Azure Data Lake Gen 2 on the right. And at the bottom is the service which we are adding. Inside the service, there are 2 components. One is the service bus and the blob storage, and the other is the trickle feed. Okay? Now what happens when you enable a particular entity for pushing it to data lake? What we do, we basically go and register that with CDS. And tell CDS, hey, like if there is any change in data or metadata in that particular entity, please tell us like about those changes asynchronously, part of the service bus. This is the push architecture I was talking. Now, folks who are very kind of deep into CDS, CDS has this plugin infrastructure. So these things are deeply integrated to that plugin infrastructure. As in the data changes, plugins are fired. Part of those plugins, the data goes into the service bus. Okay? Now, once we receive the data, internally inside our service, we read it, and push it to something called trickle feed. That is an internal service part of our export to data lake, which is incrementally reading it from the service bus, and it is writing it to Azure Data Lake. Okay? So high level, we register to CDS, we get changes in service bus, we pick the changes from service bus, and trickle feed writes it to Azure Data Lake. Okay? Now, so what we talked about architecture. Now, next step is for any customer to enable it. You already have it, right? You know, some customers may be net new, but majority of the customers would be using CDS, they already have data. So first time when you enable, there is this concept of initial sync. What it means is, when you enable, we would look at the data, it has not changed, but we would still get all those data for the first time. This is what Sabine actually demoed. You know, Sabine did not create a new record, he did not update any record, but once he clicked, the initial data flowed. Okay? So this is around the initial sync. Now, assume, you know, kind of like we start this process, we push the two entities, accounts and contacts, you know, the most commonly used entities. Okay? The files are pushed in the CSV format, and what we do, at regular intervals, we take snapshot. Okay? In public preview, the refresh interval is every hour. So when Sabine enabled, if you remember, he was, you know, trying to talk a lot to make sure the data is refreshed. Okay? So that was his trick. So initial sync, the first snapshot happens after 2 minutes. Okay? Which is what Sabine was trying to cover with model.json and other tricks. Okay? So, but it's an interesting thing. Why am I highlighting this? See, data sync is a continuous process. It never ends. Okay? Whether it is initial sync, whether it's updates, based on how much activity is happening on CDS, there is no way to say like you are always, you know, you're complete. Okay? The definition of complete is at a particular point of time. And for us to, you know, show some progress, we decided like in first 2 minutes, you know, whatever data we get, we would like call it kind of done, and the rest of the data would start showing up in the subsequent snapshots. Okay? So in this case, what happened, like at T1, we took a snapshot for account file and the contact file, and model.json is actually pointing to that. Okay? Now, consumers can start reading this similar to like what Sabine did. Sabine, you know, used Power BI. Power BI was, you know, reading from those files. Okay? But what happens is, trickle feed is going to continuously still push updates, right? There are users on CDS who are actually changing data. There are edits happening, there are creates happening, there are deletes happening, and even metadata can change. Okay? So what we do not again like wait for an hour to pull those changes. The moment the changes happen, they land in the queue, we pull from the queue, and we write it to data lake. Now, the first thing which you notice like in this diagram, the files which trickle feed is writing to is separate than the files which consumers are reading. Consumers are reading it from a snapshot, wherein trickle feed is writing to the actual hot file. Okay? So that is the read isolation which we did using the snapshots. Now, what happens is at T2, this is like after an hour, when the next snapshot comes in, what we look at is which entity files have changed. Okay? In this example, both account and contacts have changed. So another snapshot for those files are generated, which is accounts T2 and contacts T2. And now model.json, instead of pointing to the older files, is going to point to the new file. And any new consumers which comes in from point T2 onwards, they can start reading the new snapshots. Now imagine like if there is a consumer which is reading the T1 snapshot and it takes 4 hours for it to process the files. It's pretty common, right? Like if you go talk to bigger customers, they have downstream processes which runs for like 12 hours, you know, after the data is there. Okay? So we don't want to break them, okay, even when the new data is there. So the older snapshots are still available for the consumers to use. Okay? The newer snapshot is like if the consumer starts later, they can, you know, start using the newer snapshots. Okay? So this is high level around, you know, kind of the snapshot mechanism. Similar stuff is there for metadata as well. We don't have it in the slides, but like if there are incremental changes, columns being, you know, added, we do not sync the data again. We have some ways, you know, to kind of guaranteeing that only new data would get updated and the existing data won't break. okay? Now let's move to the structure of model.json. This again goes back to the initial part of the presentation where we said it is very key to understand we are landing data in a particular format, which is common data model. That is key in terms of consuming as well, because there are a bunch of stuff on the Azure stack, Power BI, Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, pretty much all these kind of services on the Microsoft side, they understand this format. Remember, like when Sabine pressed F5 on the Power BI, it automatically understood the attributes in the lead entity. There is a lead entity where the data is, where the partitions are. All that is because it is all defined in model.json. It is not like Sabine's Power BI report, which was doing anything fancy. It was just kind of connecting to that same model.json, which has all this information. So we can talk about, but high level, it is metadata, pointer to data files, and the information about the partitions. This is whether the data is partitioned by year, month, or day. And we can maybe take like a real example of model.json, part of Sabine's next demo. He can show how these things work.
Sure. So before we get to the next one, a real quick recap. I don't mean to sound like a professor, but it's good to know we are using your time worthwhile, right? So what we've learned so far is you kind of have an idea of why we build this service. That is to push the data, democratize your data, get it out to the lake. To get there, of course, you need the CDS, that you already have it, but to the destination, you need an Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Okay, so some of these are the key takeaways. The data that goes in the destination is not just dumped randomly, it's in CDM format. So that's another key word to remember. There are sessions, you should go and attend those for sure. So this is what we have done so far. What we also talked about is it's not just a one-time export, it's a continuous export. So if I make a change in the source without any intervention, it should just go to the destination. And hopefully that's what happens in the demo. So I'll show you that. All right. And of course, he blew my cover, so I can't talk a whole lot. Okay, so we are at 51 records from what I could see at last synchronized at 339. So let's go ahead and create a new record. Now, as I said, it's an athletics goods company. Now, I see a pretty diverse crowd here. Typically, I would put Russell Wilson if I was in Seattle, but that doesn't quite gel with considering the crowd here. So I was just thinking, I was actually looking up the first name for Messi. I know he's a popular soccer star. I couldn't for the life of me figure out. He's called Leo, but is it Lionel or something else? But his name is Lionel. So I'm just going to add Leo is my new lead. So let's just say Leo is interested in soccer shoes. I'm just creating a new lead. First name is Lionel Messi. And this is a big fish. So let's just say it's 2.8 billion. I got it right? Okay, good. All right, save. So we expect this to, if I put the number of zeros right, we expect this to accelerate all the way up. Now, I'm obviously going to talk. You know why? Because I need to spend the 2 minutes for the record to show up there. So I'm just going to give up on that. But while we're doing that, obviously I'll show you how you check it all the way till the destination again. So we expect this to show up in the Power BI dashboard in 2 minutes. So until then, let's just do a couple of more things. This is what happens in real world. Because we actually went on calls with at least 8 to 10 customers when they were doing our previews earlier. Like, before we went to public preview, we were in private preview. So we were working with customers, and we went on call with every one of them. And we noticed they do this a lot. So, and we're glad we have this kind of built in, wherein they added an entity, they tested it out, and now they want to add something more. So let me add account, which is a pretty big one here. I think it has like 50K records, right? So
by the way, the data is already there. Sabine did not notice. The count is 52.
No, here it's 52. it will eventually progress there, right? And we also expect that once this starts, it should show up in the lake. So it hasn't started. Yeah. Hello?
So why don't you show the record which you added in the lead?
Sure.
That is already there, right?
Yeah, so I added messy. Let's open it up. Okay, so you know the data has landed in the lake. So you know it's there, a minute, and it should be in the Power BI dashboard. But going back, why did my account?
So while Sabine is doing this, like it's important to understand, like when I said that 1 minute, 2 minute stuff, it's actually not for the data to land there. It's for the snapshots.
Yeah.
So the data landed in, kind of like less than 5 or 10 seconds of, Sabine doing the update. But there is a cycle when that snapshot is refreshed. That cycle is a minute or two, okay? And in all real customer scenarios, that snapshot cycle is not a minute. It's hours, okay? For the demo, Sabine is kind of tweaking it to happen it in a minute so that we can show the real results on the Power BI.
It's kind of like this is how we'd like to talk about the roadmap as well, that we are doing this internally as a test. Of course, it's helpful for the demo as well, but this is what will happen in the next semester. For a customer, while we started based on their feedback to provide 1 hour snapshot, every business is different, the requirements are different. So when we even spoke to some of the customers, they're like, some need bigger, some need smaller snapshots. So we're going to make it configurable. It's something that we can do it today internally. We're testing it, and we're using it for a demo as well. So as you can tell, coming back to this, account is syncing at every refresh. It seems to be, it's at 40,000 now. So you can tell, I don't want to brag. I think we've tested some of this with real customers. It seems to be working well so far. But the whole purpose of showing it to you today is so that you could go back, test it, and come back to us. Please read our blog so that you know where to drop an email to us, okay? So while that is happening, I lost track of time. Is the Power BI thing you think it should be ready, right? So if I go here, refresh, fingers crossed, we're expecting to see messy show up here. It's there. Okay? Look at me, I'm so excited about it. So again, this is an example. What we really want to show here is we're very, very proud about this, that here your data is pushed, not pulled. So there is no manual intervention. You made a change in the source, it's pushed to the destination. The way this works is part of the requirements, which is only entities which are change tracking enabled is actually supported here, because we use change tracking to do these incremental refreshes. So again, these are some of your key takeaways as well. And this was part of one of the most important reasons for showing the demo. Is there something else to show? Okay. Let's go back to the deck. Okay, roadmap. As I said, some of the features that we're working on is, so we had a requirement early on wherein trying to show like a time series data, like a change log. We might do a poor man's version of it, wherein if you want to do a lead scoring of some sorts over historical changes of records, so you have to keep appending. You're going to plan to append it over a long period of time, depending upon how you want to configure it, so that we can give you that kind of ability. So kind of that append log or like a time series data is what we are trying to do. Writing option sets and relations. Today, we don't provide the relations that we have in the source. You have to do some of the manual things yourself. So we'll do this for the next semester. That's what we plan to do for you. Configurable snapshots, I think we have covered that enough, that today it's 1 hour, but you'll be able to configure the intervals down to the number that you prefer. Now, this doesn't come free, because remember, the more snapshots that you actually, if you reduce the interval to 15 minutes, then you're going to wanting to store more snapshots in the lake. But as I said, it's pretty cost effective. I think it should be okay, but I can't make that decision for you. But that's the cost you'll pay. Soft delete, we had large customers come and tell us that, hey, we want the ability wherein you don't, even if I remove the data from the source, you still keep it in the destination because we need it for the reporting purposes. We don't want to eat up the space in the source or whatever reasons. Right? So soft delete support is something we're working on. Usability, this is not like a, hey, this is awesome, this is a must-have. So we have tried to make it pretty simple, but we are absolutely laser-focused on usability so that things are great when the demo works. Things are great when it works in your environment, but the moment it stops, you shouldn't have to call us. I'll tell you this, we have done some pretty good features, but there are a lot of things we'll have to still do to make it robust in terms of error handling. So we want to at least give you a good, friendly error message so that you know what's happening. Partitioning data based on entity, a smart partitioning way. Today, we decided that it should be yearly. By the time we go make it generally available, we might reduce it to monthly. But still, we don't want to decide it for you. So based on the amount of data, we want to tell you that, hey, this is what a smart partitioning, the data will be partitioned as. Similarly, notifications, you're not always in front of the computer. If you're on the go, you want some kind of a notification mechanism. Performance. It is not that from now we'll start working on performance. We have done a bunch of it. In fact, we have tested this service with some of the pretty large databases inside of Microsoft. So we will continue to do that because this has to serve pretty large enterprises. Now, if you remember right at the beginning, I told you there are more use cases before that. Okay, the release plan. We are right now in public preview. We are hoping to hit, we're pretty aggressive in how we are going. We're hoping to hit GA in December, provided we get sufficient feedback. If the feedback is like, hey, go spend some more time on optimizing and whatnot, we will do that. But for now, we look pretty good, so that's where we are headed. Now, going back to the use case. See, if I told you in the beginning that there are multiple use cases, I want to show a couple of more. This doesn't directly is something useful for you, but think of when you're using something like customer insights to build a unified profile wherein the source is Dynamics or CDS. Behind the scenes, what happens is, even for sales insight, at a net, all these insight apps or AI apps inside of the business application group, the way they work is you start from their interface. You say, hey, I want kind of a lead scoring. I want to build a unified profile, like depending upon the app. Then it goes, the smart algorithm goes, picks the corresponding entities in CDS, and it gives us a call, an Athena or export to data lake. By the way, that's the name internally. So Athena actually pushes the data from CDS for those specific entities to the lake. The net is, what you're using with the front end is the same service which should be used as a back end for all these AI apps, which is AI Builder, you've heard of that, Sales Insights, Customer Insights, and CCA, Customer Care Applications or Analytics. So all of these services are using Athena or Export to Data Lake behind the scenes. This is an example of Sales Insight, and I think that's it. So please drop us an email at this particular address. Please look up our blog. I have provided the address there as well. Use it, test it. Tell us if it is good, but definitely tell us if it is bad so that we can go improve. So thank you. That's the time we have, but we are open for questions, though.
From the existing data export tool, because today we go directly from the CDS data to a SQL Azure database. We put some views on top of that, and that turns into data sets for Power BI. Since this is going to go into Data Lake, it kind of tells me then maybe Data Factory is going to have to get in the middle of that if we're going to do ETL on that data before we get it into a data set.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. Before we answer the migration path, there are different use cases involved when the data is in SQL versus data lake. Okay, like obviously if customer is interested in moving to data lake, in this case the source of truth is CDS. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as a step, even customer can today push the same data which they were pushing to SQL Server into data lake, and the migration is more on their side, how they were consuming the data from SQL versus data lake. Right?
So will this technology, though, deprecate the data export service to SQL?
So that's a good question. I want to be very sensitive. There is no plans to deprecate data export service. This is incremental to data export service. We have huge customers who are currently using it. We definitely encourage, like if there are analytical kind of scenarios where the data is high, to kind of evaluate this and see if it makes more sense to use this versus that. But that doesn't mean we're going to kill that one.
Yeah, but to be super transparent, one of the key things for you to know is like if there are new customers today trying to do something similar that, hey, I want to push the data out from CRM, I would definitely say go use this. Not because that is goodbye, that is like, hey, this is the right way to go, because we feel, remember the word I used, democratize, we feel this truly puts you out there versus, I can never badmouth SQL, so I mean, like that's like a cash cow, it's a huge thing, right? But it's still limiting some of those things. Today, the way we stand in terms of the investments in the data lake, I think that's where the future is. So we'll definitely encourage new customers to go there. Existing customers, test out. You should always test out the new things, see what is best for you, and plan accordingly.
So as a customer, also look at your consumption scenarios, which makes more sense.
Right.
This could be even COGS, the cost of kind of maintaining data as well, versus you mentioned ADF and all. Like this thing is pretty kind of deeply integrated with that as well. So it's really very scenario oriented. But yes, like the future is going towards Azure Data Lake.
Okay, great. So sorry, last question. I know there have been some pain points with the data export service from a tracing, debugging standpoint. I know in certain scenarios we've just had to recreate the database for no apparent reason. So is any of the technology that's in this being fed into the data export service, or does it sit on the same code base?
See, that's a very good question. What do we share between data export service
The people
and this,
working on it.
Sabine was kind of like, yes, like there are like components which are shared, but more than components, there's a lot of learning which we have from data export service. Now, if you look at what Sabine said, like what is coming, did you see like there is one of the items around record counts, trends and all?
Oh, yeah.
So that was one of the common asks from even data export service customers. Like, hey, we want to know exactly what is the amount of data in CDS and what is the data in kind of SQL. Now, those learnings we are applying in data export to data lake. If you see from day one, we are saying we would give you a way to get alerts. We would give you a way to see how different you are from your target system and your source system. That doesn't mean like we believe that there are going to be issues. That's why you need it. The reason we believe these things are important is your source is continuously changing, right? This is the biggest kind of issue. At any particular point of time, you cannot tell like if those systems are equivalent. What you want to look at a trend and compare. Is the gap in a permissible range or not? Or is it catching up or not? Okay, so a lot of learnings from data export service which are actually applied to the export to data lake project.
Gotcha, but code bases, they're both being pushed forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sure. I think we have a couple of minutes. Thank you, guys.
A question I have, I guess, going towards recently putting Power Apps into place and setting up different environments for doing line of business apps, as well as soon to be taking Dynamics to the 365 and from CRM on-prem. And then also Power BI with data flows, and all of these are supposed to be able to use the data lake to put the data in a common data model. Where's the overlap between them? Does each environment and Power Apps go to like a different export place, and does that share with Dynamics and share with Power BI at all, or how's that kind of figure in?
So yeah, I'll explain some of it. Like, so the good parts are being shared and kind of overlap. So for example, what we didn't explicitly specify here is when you create this data lake, when you create that link from CDS environment to the lake, the data flows is a set of people who are exactly in our team. So both the services kind of coexist. So what we do is we actually stamp, and we let you know that we are stamping that data lake storage account with our service and the data flow service. So you kind of can do both. Because see, the difference between data flows and export to data lake is, export to data lake is CDS to lake. Data flows is anything outside of CDS to lake. So a customer then, even the UI, the wizard piece of it is exactly the same. Because we built it. I mean, we know it for a fact it's the same, right? So there are pieces we are aware and cognizant, and we are like trying to make it simpler so that you as a customer don't have to like think of 100 different UIs. I can give you 10 beautiful UIs, it will mean crap to you. So we are actually taking care of that. Even like the services that I talked about wherein you're using these sales side customers, even there, some of these things are hidden for you, but then behind the scenes, that's what is happening, wherein these services are getting collected and they're being stamped together behind the scenes. Is there something else you want to add?
No, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I would maybe add, so the mapping between the Power Apps environments and the CDS environments from Power Apps and the Dynamics environments, they're one and the same. So from that side, all of these, you already kind of are probably doing the right things. You can decide whether you install your apps in the same or in additional environments, and then everything you do on Power Apps will apply here, whether it's data coming in through that path or through Dynamics app, doesn't matter.
That's actually a very important point.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, we hit another gentleman in another session, and I told him like, hey, we have a session in the afternoon come that is exporting CDS data to data lake, and his answer was, hey, but I use CE, I don't use CDS. So guys, like Frank is absolutely right. It's all the same thing, whether it is CDS, CE, CRM, they mean the same thing. Yeah. And export to data lake is applicable to all of those kind of terms.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, guys.